Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Income Gaming, Cheltenham's premier friendly local game store. Check the link in the description. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that I'm pretty excited for the release of Dwarfen Mountain Holds for Warhammer the Old World. In the past, my armies have relied on lots of lovely old metal sculpts, which I very stupidly sold off towards the end of 8th edition, and I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to delve into the newer plastics. I know that some of the old metals are likely to return, but I really wanted to build an army relatively quickly so I could start playing with dwarves again. So with that in mind, I went for it and decided to make my Longbeards and Hammerers from the 8th edition kit, which has been residing in the mortal realms of Age of Sigmar for the last few years. Welcome to Miniature Realms, my name's Stuart, and in this video I'm going to show you how I've painted my Longbeards and Hammerers. So I've got my units organised with gaps ready for a king on shield bearers and a BSB. Now, having built these kits, I definitely like them more than I thought I did, at least compared to the old metal ones, which I really love. But I decided to leave the shoulder pads off the miniatures. You've still got fully chainmail arms, so they're still fully armoured. I think it just really sort of toned down that more modern look and makes them look a little bit more in line with the sculpts you had in the previous eras. Starting with decayed metal from scale colour. Now I'm using an airbrush to really speed up this process, but you could brush this on, you could dry brush this on, but what I'm doing here is aiming fairly top down, working my way around the sides as well. It's more than a zenithal, it's not zenithal, but I am delivering a little bit of the black in there just to help with the shadow, and I'll do the same with the next few layers as well. Now the miniatures will depart a little bit here. For the Hammerers, I'm using black metal from the same scale colour range, layering it up top down as I did before, leaving some of that decayed metal just showing through. Something I like to do, you'll have seen it before if you watch a lot of my videos. In fact, my recent Bretonnian Foot Knight video, you'll have seen the same colours and the same technique. And for the Longbeards, I've opted for thrash metal, also from the scale colour metallics range. Same method again, it gives them a slightly different look. Now, once I've added other colours later on, and lots of things are the same process for both units, but it will give a slightly different tone to the metal for the different units. And that's how the two look so far, so a slightly different tone to the metals, but we return to the same colour for both now, which is Game Air Silver, again one very familiar on the channel. I'm being a lot more delicate here, only placing this where I want to show where light is hitting or reflecting, so on the tops of the weapons, on the tops of the helmets, towards the lower areas of the skirts where they show a little bit more, just focusing on the top of the shield there, so you've almost got a two-tone transition effect. Very much the same thing for the Longbeard here, just giving very small amounts of paint towards the top of the shield and the top of the helmet and a weapon, just to look like the light is shining off the armour. And there we have it, that's the metal stages done. If you don't have an airbrush, don't get cross with me for using one. Just get a can of lead belcher, do a bit of dry brushing, and then the rest of the tutorial you can follow if you should wish to. There we are, both units, all metals done in about 2 hours. But I won't be focusing on full units now for the rest of the tutorial. I'll be focusing on 2 individual miniatures. You all can see the finished units in a later video. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Now I'm going to be using 2 thin coats Barbarian Brawn here to base coat in the little bits of skin that are showing amongst all this armour. Quite often I would use dwarf skin, which is an express colour like a contrast style paint, but because we've got so little area of the skin showing, there's no zenithal underpainting going on here for this paint job, so I'm just painting in the darkest tone and working up as you would do in a very traditional sense, picking out the little bits on the elbows, across the cheekbones and nose, and that's pretty much it on these miniatures. The next layer is Dwarven skin from 2 thin coats, and that is the middle tone in this little triad, and we've already used the Barbarian Brawn and we'll be using the Elven skin later on. Now, we're not reinventing the wheel here, we're just doing subtle highlights on the cheekbones and a little bit towards the tops of the elbows, leaving the darker barbarian brawn still showing around the edges, so classic layering. And that method works exactly the same on both miniatures, be that the Longbeards or the Hammerers. Two of my favourite paints here appearing in pretty much every video at the moment, Gloomy Violet and Deep Purple from Vallejo's Express colour range. They are very much like the contrast paints. I've got them thinned here with a little touch of water. The Gloomy Violet, I use it as a bit of a shadowing effect really, so in the eye sockets and around the edge where the hair and the beard and the helmet meet the skin. And then the deep purple I like to use over the bridge of the nose and around the fronts of the cheeks as well, especially with dwarves. It makes them look like they enjoy their beer, which they certainly do, enjoy a drink or two. It just kind of adds extra tone to the skin. Now, there's so little skin showing here, I'm just painting the thinnest of lines towards the bottom of the face, towards where the beard is. Exactly the same method on the Longbeard and the Hammerer, and the same on the elbows. So you're looking at the violet colour around the edges, and then the deep purple, usually just a little spot around the elbow, which I then blend out a little bit or feather out a little bit by adding water to the brush or just licking the brush and feathering it out. At this stage, I like to do my eyes, and I've covered this on videos before, but if I paint the eyes in now and I make a mistake, I haven't fully finished the skin, so I can touch that up when I do the final highlight on the cheekbones, or I can go back and do a little bit more work if needed, but it doesn't mean that I've got this perfect skin I'm really happy with and then I mess it up. Now the elven skin from Two Thin Coats as well, which is that final part of that triad. And it's very much a case of going back in and painting the thinnest of lines on the cheekbones just to make them pop. Again, the same for the Longbeard and Hammerer, and don't forget to do the elbows too. Now, this is white grey from model colour. It just covers really well. It's really smooth for a white paint, which can be chalky sometimes. It's one of my favourite paints. It's very good for base coating. And what we're doing here is going back to all the areas that I need to be a different colour other than metal or skin now, because that's what's left on the miniature. And I want to use contrast style paints here, especially on the hair. It does such a good job of that and saves a lot of time rather than painting in every single strand of beard. So the easiest way to do that is to white them out again and then use those paints afterwards. So the main bulk of this colour is going on the beards of all of the dwarves in both units. There are, however, a few other areas that need picking out. So the dwarves all are wearing leather gloves, or at least leather half gloves, showing the fingers are half covered by metallic areas. You could paint these all in metallic if you wanted to, and looking at the sculpts, I think you could paint them all as leather as well. So there's a little bit of choice there, but I've followed the box art. And also you have the leather wrappings on the handles of the hammers and on the axes. And there you have it, your whited out areas ready for the next stage. So one of my leather choices is going to be Cygor Brown contrast paint from Games Workshop from the Citadel range. I use this a lot. I've got some recipes that I return to again and again, and you've seen in recent videos. I've decided that's going to be the colour for both units on all of the leather wrappings on the handles of the axes and the hammers. And then contrast Garragax Sewer, which is more of a tan colour I'm using for all of the gloves that are on both units. Again, the same for both units. There's very little showing in some areas, just fingertips and the front half of the thumb. Now, of course, my hammers will have lots of different colour hair, but this chap for the tutorial will have Nazdrag yellow, so you can have a nice bright blonde beard. And for my Longbeards, they're all going to have white grey hair, so I'm using Templar white here, also from Vallejo Express colour. I use this interchangeably with Apothecary White from Games Workshop's contrast range. I think this one is slightly better. I think it edges it. I have added 1 part water to 2 parts of the Express colour here. It just seems to flow slightly nicer into the recesses. Now, this only works if you have a white base to do it on. The whole idea is you're kind of glazing or shading a white area rather than going with grey first and layering up. This kind of does it in reverse. We will tidy it up with some white highlights later on, but this is the easiest way I can think of doing it. Now back to some model colour. We have Hull Red and German Camo Pale Brown, and these are my highlight colours for the Cygor Brown. So we start with the Hull Red, just doing some really thin lines where the edges of that leather wrapping is down the front of this great hammer. Similar deal on the Longbeard, slightly different style wrapping, but I'm just picking out those higher edges. And using that lighter tan colour there just to do some even thinner lines just on that top edge where the light would catch. And the same again for the Longbeard. You don't want to do too much. You've got loads of these to paint in a whole unit. Just give a little feeling of light catching the edge and it will make it stand out. Flat Earth and Tan Earth also from model colour, and these will be the two highlight colours for the Garragax Sewer. So think of them almost like a little triad, with the Garragax Sewer being the base level for that, and the mid-tone because of the way that it shades and looks a little bit lighter on the higher areas. But you're using the Flat Earth there just to kind of pick out the mid-tone areas, and then you come back a little bit later on with the Tan Earth and just do some final little highlights. So again, the same on both miniatures for those little dots, the little highlights with the Tan Earth. That's all you really need, is a little dot on the knuckle or towards the end of the finger, and it just makes it stand out a little bit more. Two thin coats yellow flame to highlight that beard. We're just using the one colour. Got a nice effect already from that Nasdaq yellow over the detail that's in the beard. Just doing some very, very thin lines. You could dry brush here if you wanted to speed it up. It's a little bit risky. You're going to get some over brushing onto the other areas. I try to do everything I can in the quickest way that still looks nice, and I thought that this would be quickest in the long run. Just a few thin lines. Some of the beards, they're a little bit more open. Dry brushing might work. Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. I mentioned this before. Probably the best white I've ever used, at least for a really strong bold colour. Maybe that's why it's in the name, but I just find that it's really good for this kind of work where you want very, very small lines and small areas and you want it to stand out. You don't want to have to keep going back and doing multiple layers of this highlights here, and this colour's just fantastic for it. Dwarven Gold from the Scale Colour range. It's rubbed off the bottle there, but this is a nice kind of bright, vibrant mid-tone gold here. And I'm just using this to base layer on all the little details I want to pick out. Now, there is a lot of detail you could pick out in gold on these miniatures. And I'm trying to tone it back, or how much I do. I don't want to look quite as bright and shiny as they do in the current studio paint jobs that they've used for Age of Sigmar. I much prefer the older style Warhammer Fantasy armies, and I know these miniatures aren't the older style ones, but I'm trying to hold back a little bit on the bling. So I'm not going to paint everything gold that you could do. Very much want the silver to be the dominant colour here. This is armour rather than anything too ornate. But it is fun to pick out a little bit of gold to give it some more colour as well. So, as I said, it's a personal choice. It's not a matter of just avoiding all the little fiddly bits. But in this case, I want to tone it back a little bit with both the Hammerers and the Longbeards. There is a little bit of raised area on the helmets of the Hammerers, and I decided I was going to pick that out in the gold. Them being the King's Guard, I thought they might have the most ornate armour. I haven't got iron breakers in my army list at all, so these will be the most prestigious unit on the table. So a little bit of extra gold doesn't matter, but again, I'm still holding back a little bit on all the places that I could put it. For the Longbeards, I'm even more restrained on the gold. There's lots of little sort of filigree and things on their armour that I'm deciding to leave as a steel kind of colour. I wanted to look like beaten metal rather than all gold and too shiny, but there are a few little details I still wanted to pick out. They also have all these ornate little rings and designs in their beards, and I thought that would be a perfect place to place the gold rather than so much on the armour. Staying with the same scale colour range, this is Elven Gold, don't tell dwarves, and I'm using this as the highlight colour for that Dwarven Gold. So just focusing towards the tops of the gold areas for a very, very subtle highlight. The example of that is on this design on the back, so I'm just focusing towards the top of the shield more, or at least the top half of that gold design where the light might hit a little bit more. And of course, a little touch here and there highlighting all those gold bands in the beards. Now we have two thin coats, Sentient Turquoise, Cursed Blue and Ray Gun Glow, and this is the blue colour, the signature colour for my army colour scheme. So I wanted to get it in there somewhere, and it's quite hard to do when your unit is almost entirely armour. I didn't want to do a kind of coloured leather effect, which I could have done on the wraps of the Hammerers or something like that. So I decided to add it in a couple of other areas. So for the Hammerers, from the bottom half of the shield design, I've decided just to paint in blue. So it's a little accent colour that ties it in with the rest of the army, and it works really nicely with the gold as well. For the Longbeards, I'm going a little bit more, so I'm painting the whole sort of centre design of the shields in the blue. They don't have the gold there, as I said before, so a little bit less gold on those. I'm just working my way up through that triad, so onto the mid-tone now, and I sort of highlight from halfway down towards the edge just to build that kind of very basic transition in. Moving on to that very lightest shade, just as a slight highlight along the bottom. Same method exactly on the larger blue design on the Longbeard shields. It really helps to have all three colours on a wet palette at the same time, so you can kind of adjust a little bit, and if you go a little bit too light you can bring the mid-tone back just to blend it back out again, or even go as far down as the base layer again. So you can wet blend a little bit or just glaze and thin, and playing around with it like that is a lot easier than sort of working out of a pot and putting it away each time. Now they're really starting to come together now. That's pretty much finished the miniatures apart from more work on the armour. I'm going to be using an oil wash from Soilworks by Scale Colour, and this is grease. So many of you will have heard of this spiel before. I like to use oil washes in most cases instead of the standardised pot washes like Agrax Earthshade or non-oil, especially on metallics. I think they produce a really nice effect, and it's so much easier to produce an effect where you don't have pooling or staining on the flat areas of the miniature, and that's one of the main things. I've chosen a very light colour here with that grease colour. It's a very light, subtle sepia tone. You do much darker tones as well, so this is a little bit like using the old Seraphim sepia on your metallics. Once it dries in the recesses, it does give a slightly darker finish, and it gives a very matte finish as well, which is good because it looks like ingrained dirt and things. But where it is majorly different from using a normal wash, as I already mentioned, is it doesn't sit on the surfaces anywhere near as much. It's a lot thinner and it runs into all those crevices. You have to make a point of leaving it on the flat surfaces. But the really good thing is you can clean it off afterwards. It doesn't dry straight away. It takes a very long time to dry. Using a little bit of white spirit, you can take it off those flat surfaces, taking them back to pretty much the colour they were before, and you just get a really nice effect. So you can be a lot more lazy with it. You can slap it on. You can be really deliberate with it as well and use it as a pin wash if you want to. You see here I'm pretty much slapping it on and making sure that it really sits in any of the recesses, because it's going to shade and just kind of bring those three different metallic paints on each miniature that have been highlighted with the airbrush, blended in bit by bit. Now if you have used a rattle can and gone for a flat colour, this will do a great job with that as well. If anything, it's more important when you've only got the one flat colour to add in the shadow, and I'd recommend giving this a go if you haven't already. You can see immediately there on the sort of the big chain plates at the side that it really fills in those areas and just tones it all down, darkens in the recesses, and just makes it look so much better. And then using Artist White Spirit, go back with an old brush, but a clean brush, and a little bit of paper towel, and just dampen it in the white spirit and just remove it anywhere that it's pulled, any of those flat surfaces. Now I could leave this 24 hours and come back and it would still do that. Do you want it to dry a little bit? I did give this a quick blast with the hairdryer, but if you just leave it with an hour or so, it'll be a stage where you could do this already. It might still be wet in the recesses, and you don't want to take it out of the recesses, otherwise it undoes all of the good work that you've put into the miniature. But just taking it off those flat areas, leaving it in the recesses, and you get this really nice effect. And it really takes no time at all to go back and clean these up. It's such a simple job and very easy. And the time that you will take doing this, you will save in other areas. It might be that if you used an Agrax Earthshade style wash, you have to go back and do another whole coat with your mid-tone of your metals just to bring them back out again if it looks a little bit too dark, or an all-over dry brush or something. I find that this removes the need for doing that. Now I'm going to return with the Game Air Silver, very much an optional thing here, but I just want to really pick out where that light catch is. So I'm doing a bit of a mixture of dry brushing and over brushing. This is an old regular brush that I've trimmed the point off. I'm using the flat of the brush a little bit, and I'm just trying to catch it just where the edges show in certain areas, just to make it pop and stand out. It's not essential. It definitely looked alright without it, but I just wanted to really add that little bit of extra shine to the miniatures and really make them stand out. And there we have my hammerer. So he's not super straightforward, but he's also not super high-end either. It's a nice army standard, or should result in a really nice looking army without being too complicated. And here is the Longbeard as well. So nothing too crazy. The metallic areas relatively quick, and it being such a large area of the model really helps. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you collecting your own dwarf armies? What are you painting for them at the moment? Are you going to be using these miniatures? I'm pretty confident that they're going to be coming back, and they will be the Longbeard and the Hammerers sculpts, along with the other kit, which does the Iron Drakes and the Iron Breakers, etc, etc. I quite like these now, especially with leaving off those shoulder pads. I think it really changes the profile of the miniature. They are not as charming as some of the older sculpts from 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th edition. I do really like those as well, and I will definitely have some of those in my growing army at the time, but this is definitely a way of getting my army playable and started, and that's why I decided to go ahead and pick up these when I was last up in Nottingham. The last couple of boxes of them in Warhammer World. I know they're getting harder and harder to get a hold of, but some shops still have them. It won't be long now and they'll be back out, and no doubt they'll be better value than what I paid for them as well when they're in their boxes of 20 or whatever they'll end up being. If you've enjoyed the video, please do consider giving us a like, leave us a comment. It really helps the video get seen by others. I love interacting with you online as well in the comments. I've got lots and lots of other Warhammer the Old World content on the way, lots more dwarf stuff yet as well, leading up to the release and probably beyond that, and then lots of other things in the future. So do stick with it and give us a subscription if you're new to the channel. I will be covering lots more things in the coming weeks and months ahead. The channel has a really nice friendly Discord community, so if you want to pop over there and talk any game under the sun, talk painting, talk gaming, anything you'd like, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link to my Patreon as well for anyone looking to support the channel even further. Have a little look at the different offerings. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.